Hi there, I'm Steve Otto, and I live here at John Knox. But for years, I spent on the road telling stories. I retired early. You know, that's one thing that you end up doing. You retire early and you got to have something to do, and I love to tell stories. And so I got out and I started telling stories, and then it got a little bit bigger and I started telling more stories, and I started getting paid to tell stories. Can you imagine having that much fun telling stories and getting paid for it? Oh, I thought I was just absolutely living. And I got in, and I love to tell stories. And I went all over the country for 25 years doing nothing but telling stories. And, you know, we have a group here at John Knox that tells stories. On the fourth Saturday of the month, we tell stories, and we tell more stories than you'd ever believe, and some people don't believe them. But they're our own personal stories. But I'd like to start off with a story that I have just loved ever since I started telling. And it's called Max and Margaret. Now, Max and Margaret loved the county fair. Have any of you remember going to the county fair? But sure you do. That was the big thing when we were young, was we went to the county fair. And Max and Margaret went to the county fair every single day of the fair. They went from the sun up to sundown, and they had the best time ever at the county fair. They just loved it, and they got in, and the first day of the fair that year, they saw the first day of the fair, and the big propellant of the fair, and it said airplane rides. Airplane rides. Can you imagine having airplane rides at the fair? Oh, I thought that would be great, and Max did too. He said, "Oh, Margaret, it says they're having airplane rides for $5. Can't we possibly take an airplane ride?" And Margaret stopped dead in her tracks and said, "Airplane ride? Airplane ride? No, we can't take no airplane ride. Why, you'd miss the county fair. And besides, it says it's $5 each. Now, for the two of us, now that's going to be $10. And $10 is $10. Well, Max knew better than to fight with City Hall. And so he didn't say anything more, and they went off and down the road. And when it came time for the first day of the fair, they were walking down the road, and Max was sitting there, and he looked at the sign that said airplane rides that away. County fair this away. And, well, Max went that away, and Margaret went this away. At the end of the day, Margaret came down to the airplane place, And she walked up and said, "You dad-burned fool! You missed the whole day of the county fair. You missed the chicken show. You missed the cattle show. You missed all the good things watching that dad-burned airplane. Now, aren't you sorry?" And he said, Margaret, it's the county fair time, but it's airplane time. Couldn't we please take an airplane ride? No, we can't take no airplane ride. $10 is $10. And that was it. And every day of the fair from then on, Margaret would go to the fair, and Max would go down and watch the airplane. Oh, I tell you, it got into where he just watched it, and it was such an incredible thing to have all that time. And he watched that airplane, and it was the most fun-looking thing you ever saw in your life. But he knew Margaret wasn't going to let him take an airplane ride. And finally, it got down to the last day of the fair. Margaret came down the road, and there was fire in her eyes. I mean, she came down that road, and she looked over at him, and she said, "You did it. You did it. You spent the entire fair, and you didn't get to see a thing at the fair just watching that dead-burned airplane." And he said, "Oh, Margaret, it's the last day of the fair. Can't we please have a ride on the airplane?" "No, we can't have no ride on the airplane. $10 is $10. And, well, the pilot didn't have any passengers on that last day. And he kind of walked up to Max and he said, "Say, you'd like to take an airplane ride, wouldn't you?" Ooh, I'd love to take an airplane ride. He said, "Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you and the missus a free airplane ride. I'm going to give you a free airplane ride if you don't talk during the ride." Oh, we wouldn't talk. We wouldn't say a thing. Margaret, we wouldn't say a thing. We could get a free ride, Margaret. We won't have to say anything. Margaret said, "Well, if it's just down to that." And so there it was. They decided they would take a ride. They climbed into that airplane, and they got in and they got ready to go. The pilot got in his cockpit, and he taxied out, and he took off, and it was even better than Max had ever imagined. He couldn't believe how good it was. Oh, that airplane took off, and it landed. It was really pretty. Oh, it was the best thing he had ever seen in his life. Oh, it was just wonderful. Until that pilot took that plane and put it in a real steep climb. And the plane went that way, and Max's stomach went that way. I mean, That pilot, he drove, he twisted, he turned, he was overside, upside down, over around, ready to go, and finally made a great big loop. And he circled around, and he landed. Pilot jumped out of the plane and said, I tell you, you got yourself a free ride. I thought sure you were going to talk when I went into all those aerobatics, but you didn't say a word, and you got yourself a free ride. Well, sir, you know, I almost did talk once. You know, when you went into that great big loop, when Margaret fell out, but then $10 is $10. You know, that is part of what I did. I told stories, I told funny stories, I told religious stories, I told just about every kind of stories. But I always loved Mark Twain. Mark Twain was the best storyteller in the entire world. He could get in and he could make it everything come right to the very point. And he could tell. And, you know, it got in, it's another couple that we had. We had a couple by the name of John and Mary. And John and Mary were sitting out on the front porch of the old country cabin. And John, he was just a rock and cutting his charm. And he watched, and he was on. And Mary, she was stroking her arm. Now, not just any arm, mind you, no. Not just any arm, but an arm made of solid gold. You see, Mary had grown up in the mining country. And when she was young, she had had a terrible accident. And she'd lost her arm. And her father felt so bad about her losing that arm that he made her an arm of solid gold. And Mary loved that arm. And she'd sit and stroke that arm hour after hour. John, you gotta remember that I loved that golden arm, and when I die, I want you to bury me with that golden arm. Well, all right. Don't see any reason why not. And that fate would have it, and fate often does have it in stories like this. Mary did die. And John had her laid out in the front room of that little country cabin. And he was looking down into that plain pine coffin. And he saw that arm, that golden arm, a gleaming and a shining. That arm's not gonna do her no good. Not where she's going. It might even melt. And he took that golden arm and he hid it behind the door. He nailed the top down on that little pine coffin, and he took Mary out to the burying place. Well, that night, John was sitting in the front yard just thinking about Mary when he saw something. He saw something he'd never seen before. It was a little cloud. A little cloud. It was different colors, yellow and gray and black, and it was working around and heading seemingly his way. And he kept watching that cloud, and he couldn't figure what was happening to that cloud until all of a sudden he heard it. He heard it. That's impossible. It can't be. He heard it. It was going, "Who's got my golden arm?" No, it couldn't be. I put Mary in the ground myself, and it couldn't be. But he kept watching that cloud, and it kept getting closer to him, and closer and closer, and it was coming louder this time. "Who's got my golden arm?" No, this just couldn't be. He got up and he ran into the house, and the golden arm was there. And he heard, "Who's got my golden arm?" At the same time, he heard footsteps. Rip, rub, rip, rub, rip, rub on the front porch. "And who's got my golden arm?" John said, "I've got to hide now. I've got to lock up." He went in and he took the door and he closed the door, and he took the bathroom and he opened everything he could to keep it, lock it up. And then he heard it. That front door. It was open. He didn't have any place to go except into the bedroom. That was the only other room in the cabin. He ran into that bedroom. He slammed the door. No locks at all on that door, but he heard it as it came from the living room. "Who's got my golden arm?" what to do. Whatever it was in the front room, and it was looking. He looked around every place in that little bedroom, and the only place in there was the little closet. It had a door on it, but that was it. And he said, I've got to hide somewhere. And he ran into the closet. He slammed that door and stood clutching that golden arm to him and waited. That's when he heard it. The door from the living room into the bedroom. Whatever it was now in the same room. He stood in the darkness of that closet, clutching that golden arm to him, and waited. He heard the door to the closet opening. And whatever it was now in the closet with him. He stood in the darkness, waiting, and finally he heard it. Who's got my golden arm? He didn't know what to do. He didn't know where to go. He just stood in the darkness, clutching that golden arm to him, and he heard it. You've got my golden arm. They found John the next morning. The doctor said, after Mary's tragic death, he must have died of a broken heart. But they never found the gold